Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Can I ask everybody to take their seat, please? So that we can start on time the event. You know, I'm from Switzerland, so I like to have the timing respected. For the ones who don't know me, my name is Luc Crane. I'm the Managing Director here at EU Business School. And it's a pleasure to welcome you here for the session of Learning from Leaders. After two successful events that we had in Barcelona and in Geneva in the fall during the Business Immersion Week, it's a pleasure to finally bring this event here in Munich. And we have two amazing speakers that will be sharing their experience and that will be interviewed by Peter Vanham. As you might know, Learning from Leaders is a story and an adventure that started over 5 years ago. We first had those events fully virtual, and slowly but surely we started bringing more on-site events. And the goal is to bring amazing and renowned business leaders so that they can share their experience, that you can learn from them, and that they can share their vision, but also their path on how they reached how they made their success. So there is always a lot of learnings. We try to have quite a diverse background in the speakers that we invite, and the feedback that we have received so far from all the students is always amazing. And it's also an amazing learning from the speakers that are coming. I had the opportunity just to share a little bit, and people were amazed about the multicultural environment that EU Business School represents. And that's clearly part of our DNA and clearly an asset that you can experience on a daily basis. So please help me to welcome Peter Vanham and Ms. Judith Wiese for the first session. Thank you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be back here. We're going to make sure we safely make it across the podium.
Yes. I'm the EHS officer.
And you got to
Siemens
take
as
this in, Judith, because this is an amazing room. Also, of course, because of the people who are here. But 3 weeks ago, you probably noticed, but this was where the big event on geopolitics took place. So you are special for being here. You're all special for being here, and I hope we're going to enjoy that. Please take a seat.
Maybe not quite as disruptive, huh?
Yeah, I don't know what you're going to say about. Let's see what headlines we can make today. But Judith, I have to ask you, before we get into the tough questions, I have to ask you, we're here in Munich. You are working for Siemens. Siemens is based here in Munich, is that correct?
Yeah, Siemens was founded 177 years ago in Berlin, and then with Second World War ended up in Bavaria. A lot of our business headquarter is in the Erlangen-Nuremberg region as well, but the official corporate headquarter is here in Munich and not very far away, so this is probably a 5-minute walk from here, the Wittelsbacher Platz.
So you walked over here today?
No, I was somewhere slightly different, so I was dropped off. We're having a leadership team offsite with my P&O leadership team, People and Organization Leadership Team, and so this is where I've come from.
But I have been told by a little bird on my shoulder that you actually know the hotel also pretty well. You spent a couple of nights here once.
Yeah, well, I joined Siemens 4.5 years ago, right in the midst of COVID. And of course, I didn't have a home here at the very beginning. So as you do with a new board member, you put them up in the Bayerische Hof. And then very quickly, I found out that I have to order room service for a cup of coffee. And coffee is what I live by in the morning. So I swapped it for a hotel that has a coffee machine and where I can get the first 3 cups in as and when I like. And I'm sure they would have provided a coffee machine as well if I had asked, but that is my experience with the Bayerische Hof. Beautiful room, but
but not for living.
But the coffee machine was sacred, yeah, and that was absent.
Yeah, so that's wonderful. I'm going to stay here tonight, so now I know I can't have coffee. So you work for Siemens. You're part of what's called the managing board. Which sounds very important, and I'm sure that it is. And Siemens is also very important. Is it like, would you say it's the largest industrial company in Germany, or how would you describe Siemens in terms of its size and also what it does?
Yeah, I think we're first and foremost a technology company. That
which
is,
company is not a technology
that
company
is
today?
177 years old. Yeah, but if you want to come to a place that does industrial AI, you come to us. Yeah? If you're looking for learning about AI expertise, we have 1,500 of those experts. But we have been doing technology that really sits in the backbone of societies and industries for the longest time, and whether it's the cable that connected, us across continents through the telegraph, whether it's the first, electric mobility through trams and the like, whether it's building technologies, or whether it is now, very much an automation, digitalization agenda that we drive. And given where we are, we are really also part of a lot of the big transitions that the world is currently trying to make, either through leveraging new technology like AI, or making the green transition that is just as relevant.
I want to ask you about the green transition, but just maybe to cap this, if we know Siemens today, I think I asked you this in a previous conversation, that I'm old enough to remember that Siemens used to make laptops, or screens at least, for computers.
Yeah, or coffee machines, and, that's no longer us. Yeah.
But today, I think I almost bought a Siemens washing machine, but that's then no longer what you do.
No, that's the Bosch Siemens Haushaltsgeräte company that has now what used to be our consumer arm, but that is no longer us. So the way that we're structured is digital industries, which is basically industrial customers that come to us for software, for automation, for digitalization. Smart infrastructure, which is no longer high voltage, because that is Siemens Energy that we spun out 4.5 years ago, but is medium and low voltage, and therefore very important in terms of energy distribution, balancing the grid software, but then also building technologies. How do you make a building energy efficient? How do you automate a building so that the light only goes on when people are there, etc., etc. And then we still have fully consolidated mobility. So if you took the train, particularly a high-speed train, here in the last few days, the likelihood that you sat on a Siemens train is very, very high. And then there is a company called the Siemens Healthineers, which belongs to us we own by 75%, and so we consolidate, but we don't operationally steer the business.
And that's the healthcare business, of course.
That's our healthcare business.
I mean, it sounds hard to me, if you're a founder and you want to create a company today, it sounds hard to me to come up with that kind of an idea. Or, some people might say, I'm going to create an app, or I'm going to, open a restaurant. But I think nobody came up with the idea and said, I'm going to create a huge industrial conglomerate that does high voltage or medium voltage, equipment that makes a smart AI, that makes trains and so on. So how come Siemens is what it is today? Was it always this company, and how did it transform?
Well, I mean, Siemens was a startup at the time. 1847, it was a startup, and I think it was the third attempt to get that cable for the telegraph from Europe to India that worked. If it hadn't worked, then I would have been bust.
And that was the start of the company.
That was
as a communications.
That is really how things started, and then quickly evolved into electrification in terms of mobility as well. But I think it has always had this DNA of the technologist. If I were to say, I think every company has hero jobs, yeah? And sometimes that needs to evolve, and part of what needs to happen strategically is to evolve. But the hero jobs personified by Werner von Siemens and Halske were the technologist and the person who runs the books. And I think this is what has worked for Siemens for a long time. But Siemens was also, over the years, one of those very first big companies or growing companies that, as we have seen in other parts of the world as well, took social responsibility on very early. So whether it was housing for people that work for Siemens, I think our education system, in terms of apprenticeship, dates back to 1899. Yeah? So those were, or if you think about things like social security,
right.
Those are things that date back literally 125 years ago.
And so a company like yours, what it really does, it starts with one need that society has at that point in time. That was at the time telecommunication lines. but then it evolves along with society, and as society sort of advances, you know, the needs evolve, technologies evolve, and that's how you end up with a conglomerate like that. So let me ask you now.
And we don't like the word conglomerate so
Oh,
much
you don't
anymore,
like? Okay.
given the fact that we have now spun out a number of businesses, and
And so you are now an industrial company, or no, technology company?
No, but
that's
on a serious note, one of the big programs that we run these days is to become one technology company, because if you think about the value of data and the value of making things scalable, then you have to do a number of things that really run as one backbone, so that we can leverage data and AI in the first place, and that we have key playbooks for where that is important, and that our face to the customer is also ideally one face to the customer. So we're at the moment very much in conversation with ourselves and our customers to say, where do we actually need to be one, so that we can maximize on who we are.
And you don't deal with 3 or 4 units.
How do we make sure that for our customers we're easy to deal with, but where do we keep what we call domain knowledge, where that is really a true differentiator for us and in the way that we serve our customers.
So that's the ongoing transformation of the company. Another major transformation that's happening, of course, Judith, across the global economy still is towards the green transition, right? Decarbonization, I think we've all not only heard about it, but a lot of the people in the room probably have a specialty in it, make a career in this. You're the Chief Sustainability Officer of Siemens. So when you put on that hat, what does that mean for a company like Siemens? How is it sustainable, and in what products would you say that it is sustainable?
Yeah, so Siemens made strong commitments around decarbonization in its own operations long before I rocked up, and so we've been on that journey for quite some time. But I think what we take most pride in is that actually what we do helps in terms of transition. We think that a good 90% of our portfolio is either directly linked to sustainable outcomes, or depending on how our customers use our technology. I'll give you 2 different examples. One is anything that is linked to energy efficiency, of course, delivers cost because you're saving energy, but it definitely also at the same time delivers a carbon emission reduction. If you use our digital twin technology, you can optimize for quality, for cost, for green.
I'm scared now. A digital twin. Do I have a digital twin? Do you have a digital? What is a digital twin?
So the healthcare sector is working on digital twins of humans as well, but it basically means that we can take a product, something that is very tangible, and run it through a computer so that you simulate features of this product on the computer first. You can do the same with processes. We are now at a place also through rendering, and we work with partners like NVIDIA on this, where in a computer game on steroids, you can model entire factories on the computer first before you even touch anything in the real world. And we can even model how different product features might influence the production process. So this is really cool stuff, and of course when you think about things like resource efficiency, and combining, when we talk about combining the real and the digital world, we can do a lot in the digital world without actually using finite resources before it actually gets into the real world.
To become a more sustainable company, to contribute to a more sustainable world. So that's your first responsibility. Your second responsibility is what I used to know as human resources, and which I think now is called people.
Yeah, well, I like to call it people and organization, because at the end of the day...
Do you have a title in that, or are you then also the chief people?
No, I think what I'm called is the Chief People and Sustainability Officer for Siemens, but as a function we refer to ourselves as people and organization, because I just think, who wants to be a human resource?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, welcome Sabina, you're our favorite human resource, or and I just think we talk so much about how we want people to show up as who they are, then I don't like to talk about them as human resource, human capital, or employees. I'd just like to refer to them as the people who work at Siemens.
Right.
Yeah? And maybe allow me one other sentence. The organization piece was an interesting one when we did the renaming, because I got a lot of question about, why the O, why organization? And I think as a function, we're uniquely equipped to have a systemic look at how things play out. It's not our job to define the strategy for Siemens, but what is our job is to make sure that we look systemically at how you bring that strategy to life in structures and accountabilities, in processes and systems, but also in behaviors and capabilities. And I think this is where we take a unique lens on the system, on the living organism that is any organization.
So if you think about that, and so you don't think about human resources, we're all people, what kind of skills, what kind of capabilities, what kind of characteristics, in general terms, do you appreciate, do you like to see when it comes to the day that somebody joins a company? What do you look for?
Yeah, I personally start with very simple things like, do I get positive vibes and do I get energy? Yeah? For me, people interactions and organizations are at the end of the day something around energy. Yeah, do I get a positive sense of energy or do I get the and I think that is true for people, but it's also true for organizations. I think people self-select in terms of companies that way as well, or leaders. So that for me is one of those things. And then I just hope that people turn up with, let's call it an ambition. And I don't mean I want to be X, Y, and Z in 3 and 5 and in 10 years. But is there something that is really important for them? Is there something that they want to get out of bed for in the morning? And those are some of those fundamental traits that I think I'm looking at. And in Siemens, we talk about the growth mindset a lot. I just love people who see opportunities and possibility,
right,
rather than mitigation of risks and tactics. I mean, any business needs a good, solid enterprise risk management. Don't get me wrong, but I think there is something around opening space, opening space for opportunity, opening space for growth, and that gives me energy, and I think that is good for any company as well. And then as an organization, we have decided that we would define some strategic learning priorities for us, and they are in the space of digitalization and AI, leadership, sustainability, and increasingly we are talking about foundational skills like collaboration, critical thinking, and I think that pairs well with AI, by the way, or creativity. So I think that's the mix of what we would strategically put learning agendas behind.
Right. And on the overall, how many people work at Siemens today?
So without the health and years, it's 250,000.
250,000.
With them, it's about 312. Yeah.
Wow, that's an enormous number. And you're, I'm going to say this again. You're one of 6 or 7 people only who are officially at the head of that company, right? This is the management committee or the managing board?
We call it the managing board, and for the longest time there was really only just 5 of us, and now there's 2 more members who joined in October. Both came from internal. One of them is a woman, which I'm very happy about. So it's now 7 and 2 women, and before it was me and four colleagues. And I think the beauty of being a small team is that you really still, have one dinner conversation, right, or one conversation around the table. You can sit at one table. And then with 7, that also still works, but it's a bit harder work to make that work.
I think there's, maybe one more seat, and then you really max out the table. So, you are in charge of the people and the organization. You're at the very top of this organization. You used until very recently to be the only woman, which in a way is fantastic that you are that you've reached that. But in another way, I suppose it's sad that we still live in a world. Would you say that that's the case for you? Do you agree with that? That it's sad that you are still, as a woman, one of the very few at the top German and European companies. Is that still the case also?
Well, I mean, luckily we do see the numbers growing in the right direction, but it's slow. No? I mean, let's face it, it's still slow. And if we just go by the fact that talent is distributed equally, then that shouldn't be the case. And we have set ourselves targets in terms of where we want to be in terms of senior positions, but more importantly, we also had a look at how does that actually trickle down, because we need to build the pipeline. And we said we also don't want to go for parity everywhere, but we want to be where we do that with the business generally. We want to be better than the market, and we certainly want to make sure that when we promote, the ratio of who we promote is respective of the population that we have. So if we have 40% women in a certain part of the organization, then our promotion rate should be 40% at least as well. And we know that there is parts of the world where we struggle to find
are also living in a country here. I don't live here, but we are in a country here and a region that has been historically a very advanced economy and has been extremely competitive and successful globally. Siemens' business, I'm sure, is fully global and a lot of export. On the other hand, you see that there's now a lot of anxiety in this society about, is this going to continue? Are we still going to be competitive? Are we still going to be able to compete with the big tech companies from the US and others? If you turn that to where you find excitement, where you sort of see within Siemens, wow, they're doing really cool stuff, what would you say that is?
Yeah, if I go back to some of the examples that I've given earlier, I think that Europe has such a strong industrial base, so many great technologies around that, so much data, that sits in the industrial space. I think where Europe and Siemens have a real opportunity to lead is in industrial AI. Is in the industrial metaverse, some say, because the consumer space has long gone to the US. Platform businesses from a consumer perspective have gone to the US. But I think here we have a real treasure in terms of data, in terms of domain knowledge, in terms of technology, where we can combine these things. And I would still hope that some of the technologies that are needed from a green transition also have a chance to come out of Europe. But the race is on, because battery and solar is already going to China to a large extent. But I think this is where we really have an opportunity. And interestingly enough, neither as Siemens nor as Europe, we actually have struggles to find, the real AI experts, because that industrial space is one that is attractive to people, because it's still a lot physics-based. It doesn't hallucinate because you can't afford industrial AI to hallucinate, that runs, backbones of economies and important infrastructure. So there is something about this where I think we can play a real key role, but the clock is ticking, and I think one of the big challenges of the next German, the next French government and the new EU Commission is about making sure that we find that sweet spot between clean and competitive.
Right. I guess I could ask you more about that, but I want to get to some nicer questions. I want to get to know you as a person, and we'll, if there's time at the end, we'll get back to the tough questions about how are we going to overcome all these challenges. And by the way, if any of you have questions, you should also feel free after the next round of questions that I'm going to ask to raise them. We want to make this interactive as well. So Judith, we're here in a room now full of very bright students and people from around the world. If we go back in time and you imagine that you were there and that you were 20 again, who was Judith at that time? Did she already know she was going to be a managing board member at Siemens one day?
Clearly not. Clearly not. No, I think I need to start with my, one of these classic high school years to the US at the age of 16, 17. I think that infected me in terms of wanting to do something international, wanting to live abroad.
You did like an exchange year in the US?
Yeah, I did one
Germany.
of those classic exchange years. I lived with an American host family, and after that, it was clear to me that I was going to be around the world. And then I went through a very sophisticated process of thinking, how do I do this best? Lawyer? Business? Anything else? I went with business, and quite honestly, it was not more elaborate, I have to admit, than that. And then I very quickly I also got interested in the people space and the people in organization space. And I think today what I love is that you have this intellectual challenge that comes with business and strategy, and you have the wonderful messiness of,
Right.
working with and through people, and one is nothing without the other. Even if we try to pretend that we're only rational beings the
Sure.
minute we go to work.
And so you've done that. And by the way, and where do you come? You are from Germany, right?
I am German.
And so you were in a big city, a small town?
No, neither. I grew up in North
Provincial.
Rhine-Westphalia, which is one of the biggest states here. The town wasn't big, but it has plenty of big cities around. But then I went to the Midwest, and I lived in a town of 6,250
Wow.
people. And I always say my first assessment center was being selected because I was fortunate to get a scholarship to go to the US. And they said at the time, bring slides. And I am as old as, slides at the time were these little thingies that went into a carousel. And so I wrote to the German Office of Tourism to get them to send me these little things, and I added a few private ones, and because they said you might be asked to give a presentation, I ended up giving 40 presentations in Iowa, and
Wow.
And so I always think, my first assessment center, my first kind of presentation school, and so
That's fascinating. It
Yeah.
seems like you follow around U.S. presidents. You're here where J.D. Vance spoke. You were in Iowa at the country fair.
Well, Iowa
Maybe you're
is where
gonna
the
be the
first
next
caucus
Angela
happens.
Merkel
Yeah,
one day.
so I actually had in my town of 6,250 people, Michael Dukakis turned up as the Democratic
the
candidate
Democratic
at the time,
candidate.
and Bush Senior spoke at my high school.
Wow, very cool. Okay, so this is where you were then. You said, I'm going to go international, I'm going to go into business, and I'm going to do people. Well, it was then still called human resources, I think. And then did you immediately get a first job also abroad, meaning outside of Germany? Did you start in Germany? What was your path from there on out?
Yeah, no, my first role was in Germany, but then I quickly buggered off, and I joined Mars in the UK. I applied for a job in Germany at the time because that was advertised, and they offered me a job in the UK, and so that was 19 years of Mars Incorporated, starting on an English contract and then, traveling the world with Mars. And then I spent 3 years with a Dutch-based special chemical company called DSM, now DSM Firmenich. And then I got a phone call from the man who's now the CEO of Siemens.
And is it really that way? Is it really that once you get going and you sort of have your first international experience and you find a good company, from there on out you just go with the flow? You have sort of a serendipitous career? Or because you just summarized those 20 years in 30 seconds. Was it just one blur, or were there like key moments where you had to make big decisions and you were like, oh, shouldn't I go back to Germany, or what am I doing? I should be there or here.
I was interestingly never keen to come back to Germany. I actually enjoyed my international grand tour. No, but to go back, I think if we want to spend a bit more time on my 19 years with Mars, Mars is an organization that absolutely believed in development. A good hire was one that you promoted at least twice and was somebody who would learn.
And Mars, I mean, like, I think we all know what it is. This is the Mars company that of course makes the Mars snack bar and makes many other snack bars, and also is huge in pet food, right?
Pet foods, by now also veterinary clinics, Uncle Ben's rice,
Huge
so
consumer
big
goods
fast-moving
company.
consumer company. Still privately owned. Interestingly enough, I work for 3 companies that have all been there for 100 years plus. So there must be something about places that have values and value leadership. And Mars valued people and leadership and principles by which they operated, and I think I've taken that with me as into my big backpack. And the role that P&O played was a critical one, because Mars operated on the idea that any organization within Mars has a pilot and 2 co-pilots, which are called finance and P&O. So
and P&O being people in organization.
People in organization. So it was always clear that you play this role very close to where business is. You're a business leader first and foremost, and then you have a function that you represent. And a lot of emphasis was placed on leadership development, and a lot of emphasis was placed on learning through rotation. So I've done lots and lots of rotations and also international in a lot of countries,
yeah.
And very often this came with development centers or selection processes, and as much as you didn't like them in the moment, I always found that they were good check-in points with myself at the time. What do I really want? Where am I? What have I learned? What
because
do I
you are then
still
moving
want
to
learn?
another country, you are moving houses, so those are natural moments where you're like, okay, what happened? What am I going to do?
Yeah, but also, which job am I going into? What can I add to it? What do I really get excited about? Can I have impact? What impact do I want to have? And I think there's, as you mature, I think as a leader, you understand that you are an instrument of change. So I think a lot of the leadership development that I got was about who am I, and not just what do I know. And how do you actually use yourself as an instrument of change and the impact that you can create. And then there's the we, what do you do with your team, and there's the it, what do you do from an organization perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's always what I've really appreciated about those years of growing up, if you like, because I think we all start keen to prove ourselves, and I think the minute you start switching into how do I improve myself, how do I improve the business, how do I improve and help people improve themselves, that's actually where it gets far more rewarding.
You go from proving yourself to improving yourself. I love that. I love that insight. And so you've had this journey. Would you say that the most important thing that allowed you to go on this 20-year journey with Mars, in this case, that it was a company that had values, that you felt that you were looked after? Is that what you would advise students today to look for in a job, that they're not just looking at what is the job about, but what is the company about, and what does the history of the company tell me about where it might lead me?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you're all grown-ups, huh? I mean, you will have your own selection criteria and things of what's important to you, and I think that's a really first important message. You know, take every good advice with a pinch of salt, because it is simply somebody else's advice, and you need to come to conclusions yourself. So I think there's something about, you know, really staying open to what resonates with me. But I think there's something about the type of company that you choose from what is the business, and do I actually connect with the business I'm going to be in? And then there's clearly something around, you know, what's the vibe, what's the smell of the place? And I go back to things like, is there energy? Is there positive energy? Is there also opportunity in my role, but also in terms of what I can do with my role? That was appealing for me. But I would also say I've always been more of a generalist than a specialist, which might sound strange because I've spent all my career in P&O, but I've always liked you know, understanding the broader context. I've always liked the systemic view on things, and there are people who will love, you know, to go into something where they have deep expertise, and you know, they might make different choices. And I feel that today I have the luxury of being in a company that has great technology, great experts, but I sit in a place where I can still see a lot and choose to go where I want to have an impact. And that for me today is very much around what I would call sustainable employability. And the sustainability agenda that we do from a portfolio perspective in Siemens. But I really believe, and therefore I have an ambivalent relationship with the word where you're being looked after or care, because I don't trust paternalistic systems. I think what we need to do is provide psychological safety, provide infrastructure for growth, but then treat people like adults and let them make their own choices. And, by the way, decisions that we would have hired them for in the first place.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, like, it's an amazing insight to think about paternalism and sort of empowerment, and saying you really have to create an environment of empowerment. But then, of course, it's also amazing because you're saying that while sitting at the top of an organization and making sure that in your organization this is true, while surely at some point in the past of that organization it would have been more paternalistic as well.
Yeah.
So you're driving that change also in your current job, I'm sure.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, paternalistic organizations have a really good core, which is care.
Right.
It's just a question of how that care then is coupled with other concepts. Is care,
sure,
you know, does it come with we'll tap you on the shoulder when you're being asked, or does it come with, no, we really want to hear from you. No?
Yeah.
You know, how are you going to make an impact in our organization? But we'll support you. No? So we'll take care that there's support structure. That is a slightly different nuance, I think, and this is a journey that clearly we've been on, and in a large organization like ours, I don't think I would ever dare to say we're there. Yeah?
Sure.
But this is a journey we're on, and that's a journey that's recognized. And by the way, that also our social partners, works councils, have gone happily with, to say, no, we support that actually, that people keep learning, that we also send messages around up and reskilling as the best way to actually secure employment by being employable. Right,
that makes a lot of sense. And you have, of course, those unions, you would say, in another country, and here it's more formalized as a works council. We're getting to the part of the conversation where I'd love to open it up to the audience. So I don't know if we have a microphone. I'm going to see. We've got two questions over there. Yes. So we're going to start with that, and then I'm going to come on to this side. So we had a gentleman over there, yeah. And so if you want to quickly say who you are and ask your question, and then you can pass the microphone to the next person.
So my name is Leo. I'm studying in EU Business School. This is my last semester, and I wanted to ask you a question about. So there was a couple of weeks ago, there were many great world leaders here at the security conference. Then there's a lot of potential ongoing talks about the ceasefire in Ukraine. I would like to know, does Siemens have any plans after the ceasefire is reached? And will Siemens be playing a part in rebuilding and reconstructing Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you. Very important question. And I'm going to see if we can take one more question over there, and then you can answer. And then I'll come to this side. Very suspenseful, because I also want to know the answer to that question, Judith.
Hi, my name is Jacques van Rensburg. I'm from South Africa, studying BA International Relations here, and background political science and systems thinking. I'm already writing my doctorate with my former university in interdisciplinary thinking. It's a sub-discipline of systems thinking which we're developing. Anyway, so something that I've been seeing, having attended the MSc as much events as I could have possibly, I think we attended 12 or something, was that sustainability this year was not part of the conversation at all. Last year very much, this year defense, and so forth, and so forth. But the thing is, you can prepare for defense and so forth, but Earth will keep on going. And how does Siemens make sure that sustainability keeps part of the conversation? Because even if you look at, for example, last year's COP, it was not as relevant anymore as the previous one, and we keep moving away from the things that we really should be looking at. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Two very important questions to start with.
Yeah, let me start with geopolitics and the Ukraine. I mean, as a global business, that is always a tough one to navigate. Huh? We've been in many countries around the world for many years, including Russia for 150, and we took the decision at the time to get out of Russia for the obvious reasons. And we have engaged in the Ukraine where we don't have that many people. It's a smaller country from a number of people perspective for us, but we have been engaged in helping the people on the ground, also building refuge places in Poland for the longest time, and we will play a role in the rebuild of the Ukraine as well. Yes. So that is an important one, and
is it too early to speculate whether companies like yours, but many others, would also go back to Russia if there is ever a peace? Is there any historical precedent that you can look at in Siemens, for example?
I don't know, actually. I don't know whether there's any historical precedent, at least not of that size.
So for now, it's really that was a decision to get out, and that's it for now. I mean, like.
Yeah, it was a tough decision. You know, we built the iconic train, high-speed train for Russia, the Zapsan. And we have a lot of people in Russia, and we wanted to also do right by our people in Russia at the time. But anyway, it was a decision that we took. It's, by the way, something that I believe is part of leadership today more than ever. How do you deal with ethical decision making? And I think very often ethical decision making is misunderstood for there's a right and there's a wrong answer. I think COVID has shown us that very often ethical decision-making is about solving a dilemma and making that transparent to your people and as a board as well. Because, if I think about Germany in COVID, the question of do you intrude on people's privacy or do you restrict their movement, neither of these values would you ever want to compromise on, but one of them had to be compromised on. So I think that excursion maybe on how I look at ethics, business ethics today, for me it's increasingly in the way the world is going a question of calling out the dilemma, and then having a good, robust dialogue around how to deal with the dilemma. We don't know. We haven't had a conversation about, whether and when to go back into Russia.
But sustainability is something that
will.
you continue to focus on. To get to the second question.
Sustainability is something that we absolutely will continue to focus on. We're ourselves not an energy-intensive company, but nevertheless we want to make sure that we work on our own operations, our footprint, our products as well. But like I said, the biggest value that we can actually contribute is through our portfolio. And despite the fact that there is, tendencies that would deprioritize sustainability or even call it woke, I think the necessity for an energy transition, the necessity for energy efficiency, the opportunity that technology places on actually making that sweet spot of cost-effective and green a reality, that doesn't go away, and we think we have a big role to play in driving that. So for us, it's not a contradiction, and by the way, for many of our customers, neither. And when we look at countries, maybe last comment on that, China is really now taking a lead in this. We already talked about or mentioned clean technologies like battery and solar, but the Chinese government, with their rigor of 5-year plans, has a huge decarbonization agenda, now followed by a circularity agenda, have embraced reporting, disclosure, have embraced international standards. So I think, we will also simply find that certain geographies might now take the lead that might come as a surprise historically, but as a global business, we will continue to serve all customers and governments in that regard.
Excellent. I saw a question over here, and then I think a gentleman over there.
Thank you. Well, thank you, first of all, for the insights. Mariana, my name is, I'm teaching human resources, but despite I love human and organization much more, the question is the following about the Generation Z. I'm quite concerned that the media, the LinkedIn, etc., portray the Generation Z as lazy and not adaptable to working conditions. I highly disagree, and we have a lot of Generation Z here today. The question is the following: how do you make Siemens attractive for Generation Z? How do you adjust your culture to meet the needs of Generation Z? The research says that by 2030, there will be 30% of labor, the Generation Z, which is in 5 years. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And then there was another question over there from a gentleman.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm Benuel Omanga from Kenya, studying data science and business analytics in EU. I have a question. Since we are talking about leaders, we are leaders of today, not tomorrow. So how can you advise us to prepare for uncertainty and economic disruptions, having that you joined Siemens under the pandemic period? The second one revolves under the digital twin that you talked about. It really focused the way you brought it out about resource optimization. Have we really embraced how we can have safety by design on it, such that it can also help to adapt the safety of the people who are going to be the end users of the products that you produce? Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Excellent questions.
Yeah, let me start with I so wholeheartedly agree that that very often the media has a tendency to write off an entire generation, which I think is totally unjustified. It's very interesting. I've just read stats. I think it was Germany or Europe, where very clearly the research and the stats show that they're actually working more. Which I found very interesting and very reassuring, because I just don't have that impression at all that this is a generation that is lazy. It's a generation that is more confident about what it wants and doesn't want, and much more articulate about what it wants or doesn't want. And it's a generation that is probably voting with their feet much more quickly when they encounter leaders that that don't provide the type of coaching or environment that they were hoping to find, or teams environment that they were hoping to find. I do think that they are looking forward for for meaningful development, as much as possible, self-determination and being in the driver's seat of making decisions that are important for them. And I think they want to find meaning and purpose in what they do. And so, you know, how do we address that? You know, through as much flexibility in working conditions as we can possibly give, really good development on all fronts. And we talk a lot also in the attraction around technology with purpose. Yeah? So rather than only catering, you know, for the technical side, you know, really always point out what that technology is there to do and how that really can change, you know, lives of people, customers. And that really resonates. That has really resonated with people. So we're not struggling to attract. We get about 4 million applications per year. We hire about, you know, depending on the post-COVID years, between 30 and 40,000 a year. But you're right, yeah, the demographic change is hitting us, particularly in Europe and China. But we don't have attraction issues, luckily. So. Well, let's keep it that way. Now you need to help me again. The second part of your question was, do we do safety by design, right? For products, and the answer is yes, by and large. I mean, we rarely configure for consumers. Yeah? So it is typically products that go into the equipment of other people and then go to an end user, or it is part that is built into a production line or into a building, yeah, in the way that it's operated. But nevertheless, also through the digital twin technology, we can, for example, also simulate the ergonomics of certain processes. Yeah? So even how people then work in factories that are designed in a certain way, we can simulate that through technology as well. And of course, you know, particularly when it comes to electrification, there's massive standards on safety for obvious reasons, because you know, because that would, you know, when you deal with particularly medium voltage, you know, that would be very detrimental if we didn't. You know? So that is very much part of what we do. And now you need to help me on the first part of your question.
It was about how we can prepare for uncertainty and maybe economic disruptions. Like my friend's first question was about the geopolitical disruptions that we have. How do you prepare for that? Thank you.
I think any good company does scenario planning. No? But again, I mean, even with the best of scenario plans, I wonder whether anybody would have predicted, like I said, the last 5 years. But I think as an organization, through COVID, we learned, as many others, a lot about resilience. The more digitalized you are as a business and the more insights you have, I think, again, the better you can either switch, yeah, and shift, and or you have more insights about where you have your vulnerabilities. But the rest of it is scenario planning, and the huge advantage that we have as Siemens is simply a very, very established global footprint that allows us to shift more than maybe other companies can in terms of how they are set up.
Excellent. Judith, I'm afraid we are already at the end of our conference, but before I let you go, I want to ask you one final advice. Like really an advice. You know, most of the people here in the room are going to go very soon into the job market, are going to join companies, make careers. If you look back at your career, and you can also look forward to the rest of your career, of course, but what would be your best piece of advice to the Gen Z that's now entering the labor market?
Yeah, I think the first one I already alluded to. I think the clearer you are about what drives you, yeah, and where you want to go and have an impact, the better. Because everything else is more, you know, reading outside in. Yeah, what do people expect? What advice do I get? I mean, the more this comes from here in terms of, you know, what am I really interested in? You know, where do I want to have an impact? Where do I want to apply myself? I mean, you just can't go wrong. Yeah? The other thing that I would say, whilst decisions at your stage of a career might seem as the one decision that is irrevocable forever, it's not. Yeah, you'll be working 50 years probably. So there's plenty of time to course correct. Yeah, if you really chose wrong. So I think there are some decisions that are more reversible than others. But quite honestly, just give yourself a bit of slack. Yeah, and just choose. And if you chose not wisely or not well in hindsight, well, you choose differently. And if I were to sit my younger self back down, I would give myself the advice that I should do more external networking sooner. So building connections, building networks, meaningful networks, I think is what I would have done much, much sooner. And that was maybe one of the downsides of being in a company that was that was very happy clappy and to an extent very internally focused. I had a massive internal network in Mars. But if I were to sit myself down, I would say, you make sure that you have external networks very soon.
That's great, and of course we're going to make sure that for the rest of this week and tonight, we're going to do some of that networking. Judith, it's been really amazing to have you, although actually you had us because this is the town of Siemens. So I want to thank you again for that. Thank you for joining us. You're welcome back anytime. And for now, thank you, Judith.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks.
Well done. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, for all of you, I hope you enjoyed that. Don't go anywhere. I know that we're asking of you a lot tonight because you have a very busy week, the Business Immersion Week. And not only that, but we're already the evening. Some of you must already be hungry. Some of you may already be thirsty. Now, I've got good news for you. Actually, I got two bits of good news for you. The first bit of good news is that we're going to have one more amazing speaker. I can already see him sit right there. And the other bit of good news is that we're halfway through, and so after that, we're also going to give you food and drinks. So if you will, bear with us for the next 45 minutes, because we have a very, very special guest now. And his name, you can see it already up there. Oh, you can't see it yet. We bring Judith back. No. I'll tell you his name. It's Matthias Tauber. Matthias is a senior partner at BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, and he's actually the chair of BCG pretty much all around the world, especially in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. And he is with us right here and right now, so please join me in welcoming Matthias Tauber.
Hey, Peter. Hi, Peter. Great to see you.
Excellent. Hi. Well, it's so nice to see you. Please take a seat. We're so happy to have you, Matthias. And I have to ask you as well, for me, this is not my home. Is it your home, Munich?
Yes, it is. So I indeed just walked over from our offices. I'm at BCG, obviously. I'm based in Munich, and the offices are a 15 minutes walk from here. So it's one of the few occasions I actually could walk to a meeting.
Wow.
So thank you for having me, Peter.
Yeah, we're very honored that you did that. And so tell us a little bit about yourself. I want to ask you about BCG. I think most of us know BCG from, of course, its reputation. It works for companies around the world. Tell us maybe first, Matthias, because I look at your name, I hear you speak, and I think, Matthias, he's from here. He's a German. But I know that that's not true. Tell me, because I'm very confused.
Yeah, Peter, we met in Davos, right? And I told you the full story. So in fact, as Peter said before, I'm based in Munich. I also sort of am based in BCG, Germany, but originally I grew up in the very north of Italy. So I hold an Italian passport. I know that I don't look like, I know I don't sound like, I know my name doesn't sort of read at all, but indeed I am Italian. It's true, right? So I grew up in the very north of Italy, which is in a place called the Dolomites. It's just south of the border. And I'm sort of a native German speaker, but I do speak Italian as a second language. And I think it is in some ways representative also of how sort of we look at talent at BCG, right? There's a sort of very diverse set of talent which we welcome at BCG, obviously on the gender side, but then also sort of when it comes to international profiles and profiles with sort of a very specific identity such as mine.
Right.
And so yeah, it's true. So
you're both Italian and a little bit German, or at least a German speaker. Matthias, so tell us now a little bit about BCG. I think most of us know BCG by reputation. We actually had one of your colleagues over last year, so we know about your work in AI, for example.
Yeah.
But tell us, what is BCG today? What does it do? How big is it? Who does it consult?
Yeah. So let me start with a few maybe numbers to orient us. So by the end of 24, we had globally 33,000 colleagues overall. We are present pretty much all over the globe. We are organized in 3 regions. One is North America, the other one is Asia Pacific, and then there is my region, which is sort of the rest of the world, right, in that sense. It's about 40 countries, and it's Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and South America. We are sort of advising, as you say, companies across a range of fields. Obviously, our root is in strategy, right? I'm sure you all heard about the matrix, the BCG growth matrix. We don't do growth matrix anymore, but we advise a lot when it comes to where to take a company strategically, but then also in other functional areas on the marketing and sales side, on the operation side, on the organization side, on the, importantly, technology side. We advise companies on how to become, I would say, leaders in their field. And importantly, you mentioned it, AI plays a huge role, both in sort of what we advise companies on, but also importantly, also how we work ourselves these days. So a large chunk of our work these days is indeed helping companies unlock the full potential of AI. I mean, we both were in Davos, right? And the saying in Davos was, look, I see AI everywhere, but not in my bottom line. So that sort of was the most common saying of the typical CEO in Davos. So as BCG, we sort of hope to change that, right? So we translate AI into the bottom line. So that's a big chunk of our work. And then secondly, as I said before, it also does change the way we as consultants work, of course, right? So much of our employees use heavily AI tools these days.
What is the tool they use most, would you say?
So we are a technology partner with OpenAI. So we leverage a lot of the LLM technology of OpenAI. Then sort of there is different stacks of the AI technology deployed. It's obviously all different versions of ChatGPT, right, as the base stack. Then we have sort of a layer above, something called BCG-Q, which sort of uses part of that OpenAI technology, but actually sources data which is proprietary to BCG, so not like ChatGPT, the open web, the private web, and makes that available to consultants. So that's sort of 2 types of, I would say, technology we use in our stack. And then there's many more sort of smaller, I would say, custom GPTs, which we use in the day-to-day work. So it's
and heavily means most of your consultants would use it every day, all the time.
So we actually, absolutely, we track adoption.
Big Brother is watching you.
Big Brother is watching you, but I think it is sort of, we feel sort of initially to get it started, we do need to provide incentives and so on, and we indeed see sort of on, I would say, a consultant level adoption, like people that use it every day, to your point, it's like 95 to 100%. It is true that the more senior people get, the less adoption we see. So my senior partner colleagues are sort of the hardest ones to sort of get over the line, but I'm sure we will succeed as well there.
That's excellent. You know, you said something funny early on as you present yourself, which I think suggests that you like self-deprecating humor, but I want to ask you whether there's any substance to it. You said we have 3 major regions in BCG. We have North America, we have Asia, or emerging Asia, and then we have the rest of the world. Now, you know, I think most of us belong to rest of world. We are then in rest of world. We are here in Europe, that's part of rest of world. There's Middle East, Africa, Latin America. That is this region that you're talking about, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Now, I'm sure that you are very proud of the region that you lead. You are the chair of this region. But tell us, to what extent is there any substance to it at all that this region is eclipsed by the US and China?
Yeah. So first of all, I am very proud of that region. I am very proud of BCG in that region. I'm very proud of our clients and our colleagues in that
How much
region.
percent would you say is that of the
So
global business?
at BCG, it's about 40-20. So 40% is what I do, 40% is North America, and 20% is Asia. So roughly, I think, in terms of the split. So it is important. Yeah? And I am very proud, as you said, of what we have achieved there for our clients, for our people, and so on. Now, you ask a good question. I mean, there is. So when you talk to CEOs these days, there is a huge transatlantic divide. Yeah? If you talk to CEOs in the US, sometimes you say, oh my God, how much optimism? I mean, can this really be true, right? And then you talk sort of to CEOs on this side of the Atlantic and you say, oh my God, is there anything else other than pessimism, right? So there is a big transatlantic divide, I would say, in how people and executives do see the world, the future. I don't share that. I am actually, I'm an optimist by nature, and I do feel that there is a lot of also very positive things and also opportunities, quite frankly, around. That's not easy, right? And I think things will have to change, will have to evolve, right? Both on a national, on a European, and frankly also on a corporation level to unlock some of them. But I see a lot of opportunities also.
What is an area that you are optimistic about specifically in this part of the world? That you say there's a bright future in this industry or in this country?
So one thing, for example, I am optimistic about is that we are unlocking more investment as we speak. I mean, we're right here in Germany. You probably followed the news. There is talks about investment on the defense side, but also on the infrastructure side on a significant scale. Now you may say, oh my God, all this debt, right? But I do think that that investing in our future will, I think, both obviously help the industries that are sort of participating in that, in this case, the defense industry, but also the industries sort of helping to build that infrastructure. But also they will provide the basis for many other industries in that part of the world. So that's one thing that...
That's sort of the idea that, you know, a lot of the big tech companies in the US grew out of the military bases in San Francisco and sort of the military industrial complex there, or that Israel as a startup nation it also has as a base that it has a very strong military. Yes. You say that is something that you've seen elsewhere and that could happen. It could actually have that positive technological side effect as well in Europe.
It will, I think, it will. And I'm actually quite certain that it will have a positive side effect. Now, it's also true that it's needed, because if you look at sort of GDP growth during the last years, there was a big gap between North America and Europe. North America did grow faster. I do think we need to catch up, and I think we need to do our part. I think the investment, as I said, will play its part. Another area which makes me positive and confident about, I would say, the part of the world I'm responsible for is the breadth of talent. And I mean, I'm looking around in this room, but not only. I think there is really a lot of excellent talent available in core Europe, but not only. And I think that will, ultimately sort of make its way. Yeah?
Right. Now, let me ask you another thing, which I know that BCG has been very strong on, and I've talked to a few of your colleagues that focus on the geopolitics and trade as a specialty, you know, how to navigate all the turbulence in geopolitics and trade. Now, we alluded to in our earlier conversation, but on this stage a few weeks ago, we had the Munich Security Conference, which also foreboded not just what's happening in Ukraine and all the developments there, but also what we're seeing right now in the US, this sort of divide between the US and Europe, the emergence of a trade war. When you look at that, what is in general terms the best way that a company can deal with that kind of disruption, the trade, the tariffs going up, you know, the turbulence in political relationships, and basically all that was true that they counted on in the past to build their company may no longer be true?
So this is a really, I would say, live topic. I mean, I'm sure you all watched the sort of tariff discussion, and it's huge, right? It is huge. Independent of how you politically think about it, it's huge, right? I mean, it affects just from a US perspective, just sort of trade with China, Canada, Mexico, that's sort of the immediate countries that are being talked about, is 44% of the US trade, 44%. It's gigantic. Yeah? So I think there is a huge, I would say, huge discussion at play. So it is a very topical, I would say, thing to discuss. Now, number one. Number two, you did say that indeed, as BCG, we have a center which is called Center for Geopolitics. It's housed in our Henderson Institute, and we are it's a think tank that collects insights, data about trade flows and helps companies navigate. It's one of the most sought after things these days because it's obviously a very, very hard landscape to navigate with, again, fast pace of change overall. So that's what we do. Now, what are we advising companies in this, I would say, general climate? I think there is a number of things that for companies are pivotal at the moment. The first thing, and I think it's maybe the most obvious one, is that every company these days needs to build its geopolitical muscle. So when you go back 10 years, companies like Siemens, we had Ms. Wiese on stage just before, geopolitics wasn't a discussion. You made an investment, right? You made an investment decision. It was about the business case. It was about risk. It was about financing. It was about how would you get the talent there and so on. Did you talk about geopolitics? No, you didn't. Zero, right? Today, it's a huge discussion, right? Whenever you build a plant, you talk about the geopolitical considerations about that particular location, about the supply chain implications and so on. So I think to inform that part of very important decisions, investment decisions and others, companies do need to build up what we would call the geopolitical muscle. This is teams, small teams, high caliber teams that are advising management boards, advisory boards around this particular topic. So that's the first thing we recommend to companies. The second thing we do recommend to companies to very carefully think about their supply chains. So you're obviously more exposed if your supply chains span the globe and you're not as regional, not as local in your supply chain as maybe some other competitors. So rethinking your supply chain, both in terms of, I would say, regionalization, localization, but also flexibility and backup plans is a big deal, because otherwise you may well, because of all the changing things, suffer either tariffs, shortages. This started, by the way, also already during COVID, but it is also something which is sort of, that's a second thing we are advising companies. So that's sort of two, I would say, cornerstones of the advice we give.
So if you're looking now very concretely at what's happening, you alluded to it, the trade war that has started between the US and Canada, Mexico and China, with the European Union probably not far behind. Is there any other advice that you can give to companies other than saying either start building factories in the US or go talk to your prime minister or chancellor and pray for a diplomatic solution? Is there anything else that they can do?
Look, there is other things you can think about. You can think about other growth markets. You know, you can sort of, then that's also a third piece of advice we do give to companies. It's sort of think about markets you may have not had on your radar screen so much before, often in the global south. Yeah? So this is now specifically to European countries. We have Mercosur, which is sort of a trade agreement between Latin America and Europe, which opens up several opportunities on the Latin American side. India is emerging as a huge market. So I think broadening your footprint on the customer base beyond, I would say, the more traditional markets in North America is also a good idea.
Wow. I mean, I mean, sure, you know, and that is another option, but it's really a little bit, I scratch my head literally thinking about the idea that for European companies who for so long had so many strong ties with the US, that actually they would now have to say, well, you know what, we'll have to look elsewhere. But it is, of course, a reality that you have to bear in mind, because 25% tariffs, Matthias, and maybe you can enlighten us a little bit on this, when you get, because we all hear all these percentages being thrown around, but what I've heard is if you have up until 10% tariffs, that you can absorb one way or the other. The moment you go above 20%, it really starts to disrupt your supply chain and your business and your competitiveness. Is that, would you say that that's fair, more or less?
It depends really. It's really category by category and product by product in the end. But what is true, 25% is a lot. And I think the general theory about tariffs is that obviously at some point they will have to be passed on to the consumer, and obviously are sort of making those, I would say, companies that have to sort of incorporate them in their calculation less competitive versus competitors that don't, right? So I think that also makes sort of, that creates the imperative about rethinking your supply chains, which was my second point, before. So yes, the answer to the question is 25% are meaningful, right? They're meaningful both for the company. They're frankly probably also meaningful for the consumer on the other end of the spectrum,
right.
Which, and look again, depending on where you sit on the political and economic spectrum, it may well be inflationary as well.
Final question on the business side. You know, we are in a country where the automotive industry has historically been extremely strong as a motor, literally and by a figure of speech, for the entire economy. We've seen, I think, sort of a collective depression almost among many people in the automotive industry, including its leaders. Do you see a bright future for European and German automotive, or are we going to have to manage a decline?
It's clearly an industry in transformation, right? I mean, it's hard to tell where we are. I think we have it, I would say, as I said before, I'm an optimist. I think we have things in our own hand, right? But we will have to transform, right, in order to stay competitive. I think what is happening is that there are strong competitors emerging in China, in particular, but not only. Particularly when it comes to the BEV side, there is an advantage, both on the bill of materials. People are talking different numbers, but you're talking 10 to 15% cost advantage because of some of the, I would say, longer-term raw material strategies China has deployed and many, many other things. So there are strong competitors emerging, which I think the European industry has to deal with. And the historic, I would say, competitive advantage in the IC, on the internal combustion engine, which still exists, is less and less relevant. So I think there is an industry in transformation, and I think the transformation will have to encompass many things. It's one on the technology side. I think it is important for companies to embrace a multi-powertrain world.
Right.
I would hope that also this is embraced by the regulator in the right way. I think it is important also to embrace a change on the demand side. And I would again hope that sort of on the regulator side, I think Europe overall wakes up to it. And then I think, look, I do think we have a chance. I said earlier, this region, Europe, Germany is home to strong talent. I think that holds true also in that industry. And I would hope we can take it on.
Yeah, you end on a positive note because you're an optimist. But when I hear a consultant say an industry is going through a transformation, that usually doesn't bode very well for the people in that industry. But we're gonna leave it at that.
I'm not sure.
We're gonna leave it at that because I want to ask you some personal questions. Yeah. And I asked this same question to Judith earlier on. You know, if you think back, Matthias, if we can take you back in time to when you were the age of the students are now, when you were in your early 20s, did you already know you were going to be a thought leader at BCG and chair of rest of the world, or were you still happily skiing in northern Italy or something like that?
Well, this is a good question. I was quite far away, I have to say, from that, Peter. So I'm actually an engineer by background. So I went to university, I went to engineering school, and look, before I started at BCG in the year, I started as a visiting associate, which is in 2002, yeah, so more than 20 years ago, and then started as an associate in 2003 thereafter. But I was an engineering student, and look, when I first applied at BCG, I had the idea of doing something different, but I had literally no idea what I was getting into, right? Literally no idea. So I I got into it, I got to enjoy it, but I came to it from a background which had nothing to do with business. So you're much better positioned than I, certainly for a career in consulting at the time. So I had to learn a lot. I learned a lot and I got to like it over time. But I came from a place which didn't have much to do with consulting.
Right,
Yeah.
so it was one of those cases where you start a career in consulting on the one hand because you like what it promises, but on the other hand also because it's sort of by elimination, I don't know what else to do.
It wasn't quite like that. It wasn't quite like that. I actually had, my original idea was, look, I'm gonna try this out for a summer, and then I will go back to engineering, because that's really what I would like to do. So I had actually a plan A, which I quite liked, I have to say. So, but then plan B turned out to be quite fascinating. So I sort of did my summer internship, and I really enjoyed it. I really did. And the one thing I think, besides me enjoying it, made a big difference was at the time, and I still think back to that a lot, was at the time my project manager, so the person leading the project, which I was on there. And I still say this today to our project managers. I think he made a huge difference in my life. He made a huge difference in my life because he actually, look, I was an engineer. I showed up. I was good when in everything on the analytical side. But God, I had not much idea about how to communicate, how to sort of bring insights across and so on. And he took the time. He genuinely took the time about sort of helping me, mentoring me, and sort of, yeah, also helping me enjoy what I was doing. And I think it's something that I hold close to my heart, and I think it's also a little bit of a piece of advice I would give to all of you. I think this, look out for people that can help you. Look out for mentors. They can come from very different places, and people are genuinely interested in helping you. They are, right? So I think creating that network, and Judith said it earlier, building that external network, but also creating that network of people that can help you in different phases of the career is super important. And for me, this person made a big difference. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that project leader that saw something in a very young summer, essentially.
Yeah, that's very beautiful, and we often forget that, right? That when we think back of our careers, we think of the steps we took,
Yeah.
and sort of you can look at somebody's CV and you think you know what
Yeah.
the career looks like, but in reality, there's often people behind and individuals that were there on key moments when you had key challenges.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing that. And does that person know how important they've been for you?
It's a good question. Well, he left BCG afterwards at some point, as many do, right? It's a very normal path
Right.
in the career. I did connect with him when I joined, and I said thank you. I was thankful, and we obviously stood in touch, but we lost sort of sight. So he does know, but we lost a bit of sight.
Yeah,
over time.
it's interesting, and so it's important for us to remember, one, when we go out into our careers, to seek out, as you say, people that would be willing to help, because there are often those people out there in all the companies that we go to, and I suppose at some point you switch over to paying it back,
Yeah.
right, and sort of being that person that can actually help other people along the way, and that's a beautiful moment. I wanted to ask you about this, but you already kind of answered it, which is when you were at BCG, you liked it. You know, you took a while to sort of really find the confidence in some of the soft skills, and from there on out, do you just know that, hey, this is my home, and I like this, and I'm going to build my career here, or how does it develop?
Well, I would wish it's as linear as you just described. It's obviously not, right? So I enjoyed it. What I didn't, I enjoyed the people side of it. On the BCG side, but also on the client side, you get to know a lot of amazing people. You learn a lot from others.
You were in
enjoyed that.
Munich, by the way, officially, or in Milan?
I was in
or?
Munich. I started in Vienna. I I then went again to university in Singapore and in France. I then came back to Munich. I worked a lot in London. I worked a lot in South Africa. I worked very internationally, actually. So I wasn't that German-centric, so to speak. And I got to learn a lot. And look, there were many positive situations and much reinforcement. There was also, look, situations which were hard. Look, I got elected partner in July 2012. And sort of as you get elected partner, you have a client base you serve. And the main client I was working with at the time, there was a big leadership change just in that July. Yeah, just in that July, essentially, was a large leadership change. And essentially, the new leadership decided that they would change the approach in terms of how they would work with advisors at the time, right? So I had invested much of my career at the time into, I would say, into that particular client and that particular industry. And in the course of weeks, for reasons I had nothing to do with, it essentially fell apart. And so yeah, you can imagine, right? You just get elected partner, you get all these great congratulatory emails, and you feel really bad, right? Because you say, oh my God, thank you very much for congratulating me. This is going to be very short-lived. So I actually sort of didn't have a great summer thereafter.
Because the way it works, of course, you get elected partner, you say you serve a client base, but that also means it's almost a little bit like you eat what you kill, right? Like you're responsible then to make sure that you bring in revenue through clients. That's sort of how you maintain your stature as a partner, right? Like you really have the responsibility to make sure the company grows by bringing in clients.
I wouldn't formulate it the way you did, I think, but it is, because it's
I'm a journalist, so I can use a little bit more visual language.
You can use, but I wouldn't not just formulate it because of the language. I think it's actually also it's not entirely correct, right?
Okay.
But you're obviously, how shall I say, as a partner, you're asked sort of to serve a certain client base, right? You have a commercial responsibility. Obviously, that's why you're a partner, right? That's why you're an owner of the firm. It doesn't. It's not as short-sighted as you just formulated it, right? But obviously, how should I say, right? I mean, your raison d'être depends obviously on, I would say, the ability to serve a certain client base, right? I mean, that's how life is.
And at that point, you felt like the ground was, shifting under your feet?
Because the ground was shifting under my feet. It was, right? Because, I mean, much of what I had invested, like my time in the last years, was essentially being questioned. And so.
And how did you recover from that?
Well, I did recover.
Clearly,
as I mentioned. The recovery was essentially, the first step to the recovery was actually, so ultimately, you sort of start serving different clients and you build up another client base, right? That's sort of what happens.
Sure.
But the more important part of that recovery is that you sort of is your inner self, right? Is because you're obviously devastated, you lose self-confidence, you're sort of, oh my God, where is this going? And sort of, for me, the most important part of that recovery was to find that resilience. Yeah, and I got it by I had lots of friends at BCG, also outside of BCG. I did look for those conversations, and I was surprised. Many people had very similar stories to tell me, and sort of I discovered that I'm not the first one. Right?
It's a lesson that when you open up, when you show vulnerability, including sometimes to colleagues, which is risky, because you wonder, is it going to hurt my reputation? Are people going to watch me now badly? But then it's surprising actually that oftentimes people appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And then open back up to you.
That's exactly what happened. So I think it was, a moment of truth. I was surprised how precisely what you just described could happen. And people were genuinely helpful, and so it gave me also the confidence, the resilience to sort of manage through that. And I think that's, besides the piece of advice which I gave before on the mentorship, I think the other advice I would also give to everyone is resilience is a super important skill. Because let me tell you one thing, it's not going to be linear. It's not going to be. Also, Judith said it earlier, have the courage maybe also to adapt, to shift. That's true, right? I think, but it's also true that there is going to be bumps. I mean, I wish, I hope, maybe not.
Right.
Some of you, for very
Some
few.
people are born for luck, and
Some
they
people are born for luck, but most people will not. Most people will not. And then I think the key skill is actually resilience. It's about recovering. Yeah? And resilience and recovering, it's not in the outside, it's in you, right? I think you need to keep going. You may need to adapt certain things and so on. You need to keep the self-confidence. And I think maybe having a network that can help you get there. You don't need to do it alone, but as you said, opening up and so on, I think is going to be helpful. Yeah.
If you then look at, you make that shift, you make it to partner, which is a very important milestone. You're confronted with a big challenge. You recover from that. Now we're still talking about a gap of a couple of years between then and now. Yeah. When did you realize, hey, I'm not just going to succeed as a partner, but I'm actually going to be able to be a leader in this global company? How did that happen?
Yeah, so I was then a partner. I rebuilt my client base. I truly enjoy advising companies. I truly enjoy making others successful. So I love that part of what BCG and sort of the advisory space gives you, right? So I love that. And then sort of I was responsible, so I served clients on the industrial space. I was responsible then first, I was being asked to lead a global sector. And I enjoyed sort of the development opportunity which that gave to me personally. It was a global role, so you get to know many others. So really, and then sort of at some point, I was asked to lead our business in Germany. And I was hesitating. I was actually I wasn't 100% sure, well, is this right or not? Because precisely what you said, it would take me away from what I actually love, which is the client side, which is the advice, because it takes time, right? You still continue in sort of a job like mine, you're never giving up on the client side 100%, but you sort of, time is finite, the day is 24 hours, right? So I would have to give up on that. So I was hesitating. And the reason that ultimately then drew me into that was actually the fact that I saw this as another means to personally develop. So to develop as a leader, to help others grow. And I, to date, don't regret it.
Yeah. And so then you really get into that sort of leadership, you lead the company, you lead people. Yep. If you now have to say what's next for you, do you continue to see things that you would like to achieve, that you would like to work on? What happens after you've reached the top?
It's a good question, Peter, if I would only know.
You come here for an interview, of course. It's what you do.
Of course. But look, I think so. My source of motivation was never, how should I say, a title or the next title and so on. I always got energy out of what I do, advising companies, helping others succeed in my leadership roles and so on. And that's still true, right? That's true today, right? That's true today on a larger scale. And I get a lot of joy out of that and a lot of energy out of that. And that's my purpose, I would say, at the moment. And my objective is to do that as well as I can. I have a lot of passion on the entrepreneurial side. I do think it's important for leaders to stay fresh and think about truly as an entrepreneur. I do that. I did it all my life at BCG. I'll do that until my last day at BCG, and I'll do it thereafter. But I have a lot of passion for that part. So that will certainly be a constant, I would say, in my life. Yeah.
That's amazing. I want to make sure we leave some time for questions from the audience. Yep. I loved this first part of the conversation. Thank you, and I think a lot of people did too. Thank you for listening to us. So we've got a question over here. I want to make sure I go to some people in the back, and then also one over here. So there was a gentleman there. Yeah, about there in the middle, I think. Yeah, sure.
Good evening. My name is Siddharth, and back in India, I was a consultant working for Deloitte USI. And now, as a student, as an international student who's trying to break into the world of consulting in Europe, what key qualities in firms like BCG value the most for non-European applicants like me?
Thank you. That's a great question. I want to make sure we get to the gentleman there with the glasses. I think you were also raising your hand, right? So let's get the second question in, and then we'll. Oh, sorry, over here, gentleman with the glasses. We'll get time for a couple more questions after that.
Yeah. Hello, Mr. Tauber. My name is Igamin. I'm a student of EU Business School, and my question is, what do you think about integrating AI in financial services, financial institutions, for example, as Deutsche Bank did with NVIDIA, so they financial institutions with AI? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
So
the first question was on,
Yeah.
of course, what qualities do you value, especially also from non-European applicants?
Yeah. So what qualities do we value? I don't think there is a huge difference sort of in terms of where people come from, in terms of what we value, but maybe to be specific sort of on what is sort of needed to succeed in consulting. I think it starts by, I would say, a strong analytical skill set. At the end of the day, we ground recommendations in very often in data, in sound analytics, and so having that foundation, I think, is super important. Yeah, it's also super important that, and there I think there is a link to the AI point. I think using AI on that analytical part is sort of an incremental step. I would say these days it's important. So that's one part. The second thing I would say, which is very important, is the ability to approach problems in a structured way. Problems are often, they're never the same. When clients come to us with a question, they're never the same. So I think it's super important that overall as a project team, but then also individually as an individual, you're capable and able to sort of break this down into the steps and sort of peel the onion, right, in a good way. So structured problem solving is a super important skill set. And thirdly, I would say communication is a really, and I would say broadly, interpersonal skills is a really important and probably more and more important thing, because at the end of the day, yes, we deliver insight, yes, we deliver solutions to problems, but really we deliver change. And change only happens through people. And to deliver people, to sort of have people change and adapt, you need to communicate, you need to interact with them, you need to make sure they understand the recommendations, they adopt it, and they move it on. So the three things we're looking for is people with a sound analytical skill set, with the ability to structurally sort of approach problem solving in a good way, and thirdly, that have that ability to communicate and act with people in a very effective way. So that's, I would say, and that's true for candidates from Europe, from outside of Europe. I think there's no big difference in that. On the AI question, it's a really good question, and it's sort of a question, obviously, which is the answer to it is changing by its day. I'll start by first of all saying that indeed AI is disrupting many industries and many functions. And I would sort of always say that it's obviously a constantly moving part, but on the functional side, I would always say probably the most disrupted function is marketing. Yeah? And on the industry side, probably the most disrupted industry is indeed everything around services, and particularly financial services. So your question is indeed spot on. So applying that technology and bringing it to life is a big deal. It's a big deal for companies such as Deutsche, but obviously not only. And it's a big deal to change the interactions with their customers, which will be more AI-based. People will interact less with humans. They will interact more with agents at the end of the day. But also the way many of the internal processes are run, right? So I think you can automate a lot, you can a lot more, right? And this is all on the retail, I would say, on the retail banking side. And then you move on onto the commercial side, the wholesale banking side, and then the investment banking side. I mean, you can think about many use cases in that space. So it's going to be an industry which is going to be powered a lot and disrupted also a lot by AI. Yeah.
Excellent. I had a question here in the front, and then I want to see if we can go to a question. Okay, maybe over there. Fine. So here, and then the gentleman in the white shirt. And we're going to get a microphone over, I think. Yeah, and okay, sure. We'll take one more question in the back, and then if we can bring a microphone over here, that's great. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Lusajo, and I come from Tanzania. My question revolves around BCG is known to attract top talents, right? And my question really relies on how does BCG, I would say, prepare the next generation for to create a proper impact in this highly changing world.
Yeah. So should we take another
question? Can you over here? Yeah, a second question. But you remembered that question?
I will.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Anastasia Fedotushkina. I'm working for Page Group. I'm Senior Associate Director in a big recruitment consultancy. And my question is about how you personally try to balance your work and life, because I saw an Oura ring, and maybe this is a Garmin watch.
That's true.
And how it is handled in the regions you are leading, because consultancy was known in the past for not so great at work and life balance, but the situation changed, and I would like to hear your opinion how you did it with the regions you are leading.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So maybe I start in the back,
sure.
Right? So the question was about how do we prepare people that are, or BCG attracts top talent, and how do we make sure that that top talent really become the leaders of the future? And I think it's a really good question, because we sort of value proposition also for people joining BCG. It's obviously you join a great company, but really I think people want to develop and want to use also BCG to become those great leaders, right? Now, what are we doing in order to make sure that they can become those leaders of the future in today's world? So one is we place a lot of emphasis, of course, on sort of having people learn, I would say, this sort of traditional skill set of leadership, right? That starts off by on a more consulting level, you will learn everything I said earlier about problem solving, but then when you become a project leader, about how to manage projects, how to sort of lead clients along the way, and so on. So you get sort of, I would say, the core leadership principles along your way. Number one. Number two, you will see a lot of industries. Yeah, you will see a lot of industries. You will start with a relatively broad base. You will then narrow down, focus on one, and get to know that in depth. But you will see a lot. And that will help you, because you will obviously maybe get to know one, maybe two industries more in depth, but you will also see others, so you can draw analogies, right? So that's a second thing which we think is important for also preparing leaders of the future. And the third thing, you will be confronted with very difficult decisions, with decisions about when you make a recommendation, should we go left, should we right? And these decisions and these recommendations, there's seldom an answer which is 0-1, like the analysis tells you you should do precisely that. I'll caution you that seldom exists. Very often it requires interpretation, it requires business judgment, it requires ethical judgment. And I think by being exposed to an environment such as in BCG, you will be a much better leader also in that, so you will get much better judgment in so many dimensions, on the business side, on the ethical side, and so on, which hopefully makes you a great leader. So I would say we hope to build, quote unquote, a curriculum which gets you A, the basics of leadership, B, the industry depth, broad, but then also deep, and C, also this judgment on the business, but also beyond, importantly and increasingly important, on the ethical side. Now, there is a fourth thing, and I think you also sort of one thing, and that's a bridge a little bit to the question afterwards. What you will also learn at BCG is to make sure you balance, you cope with things, right? Because there is the workload is high. The workload is high at BCG, but it's also high in other high-paced jobs. And I think the ability to self-organize and get things done is an important success factor for many leaders. And it's a bit of a link to the work-life balance question afterwards, but it's also a thing you should over time, of course, learn. Now, with that, I will switch to the
the Uro question.
The Aura question, right? So indeed, this is an Aura ring, right? So for those of you who don't know, this is sort of a ring that helps you measure all sorts of data about sleeps and so on. It's a Finnish startup, and it actually works pretty well. So, and this indeed is a Garmin watch, you're right. So I am passionate about sports. That's why I use this watch. And it's all sorts of sports. So I'm passionate, as Peter alluded. I'm a passionate skier. I'm passionate about ski touring. So this is hiking up and then skiing down, and climbing and all sorts of other things. So this is where it helps me. But I think the question really was also about how do we deal with work-life balance, right? And what is sort of how have things maybe also evolved over time? So first of all, as I said before, it's an important skill set I think we all learn over time. I do think in today's world we are much more attentive to making sure that we balance things out. Obviously, because it's a part of the value proposition to our people, because people talent today, I think, has a different, I would say, places a different emphasis on it. But also, we think it's, frankly, it's not that effective to have 80-hour work weeks or whatever, right? You're not going to be productive in that, right? So we place much more attention. We place much more attention to it and teach people also skill sets to deal with. And then I think, look, every individual, I think, one needs to also find your own way. So, for example, I protect my weekends to a large degree. As illustrated, I am passionate about sports, right, which helps me unwind. And everyone will be different about that. But you do need to actively, I would say, make choices and then act upon them. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. I had promised I'd take that final question and then we'll wrap it up. So if we can bring the microphone to this gentleman in the white shirt, and then we'll end it. Yeah, over there. No pressure. Last question of the night.
Hello, my name is Vladislav. I'm a student. And coming back into geopolitics, you represent company headquartered in States. And your personal feelings, what will be happening between United States and European Union in terms of business relationships? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This is
easy, the last one.
You get the last questions.
Just an easy one.
So it's obviously a time which is, how should I say, it is turbulent. I think that's fair to say, right? I feel that as a company, right, and as a corporation, BCG's, our first and foremost objective is, or we have a couple of objectives, right? Our main objective is to make our clients better. I think we also need to go back to what we should be all about. Our first objective is to make our clients better. Our second objective, which is very much related to that, is we need to do a good job for our people. We need to be very respectful to our people. We need to make sure our people have development opportunities, and we need to make sure that they have an environment in which they can thrive. And then thirdly, yes, we also have a duty, I would say, to society as a whole, right? Now, on that third aspect, right, what is the role, right? How far should one go, right? Should we take a position in one or the other? I'm not sure about that one, right? I think it is, I do think sort of, and there's different schools of thought, right? There's different schools of thought. I'm sure there is leaders that say, look, I think it's absolutely the role of CEOs, leaders, and so on to also take a stance in many of those positions. There is another school of thought that says, look, people should do what they're best at, right? And entities should do what they're best at. And that means for companies that they are best at, I don't know, BMW is very good at producing cars. You produce cars, right? Political parties are very good at taking a position and ruling a company. That's what they should do, right? They shouldn't produce cars, right? Consulting companies are very good at making their clients better, at providing opportunities for their people, and overall acting in that. And I think that is sort of the first and foremost thing we should stick to, right? There is, and as tempting as it may seem, right? I feel that there is a bit of a danger of sometimes overstepping it, right? Particularly these days, because also you don't know, right? It's a very uncertain world now, right? So that's sort of, it's a bit of a more generic answer, right? But I think
I respect that.
I do feel that is sort of that is overall, I think, sometimes maybe a healthy approach, right?
Yeah, it's, of course it leaves wanting, right? Because we want to have answers, we want to have people that show moral leadership, but we realize, I think, and we've had many conversations with leaders over the past couple of years, also on geopolitics and the return of war, and I don't think I can think back of a moment where there was an answer that I said, that's it. And it also, and even if it had been there, even if you had the best point of view, you're not in the position that you can change it. It is, at the end of the day,
it's a reality you deal with, right? And I'll give you an example. It's not the situation between the United States and Europe, but so in my region, we have an office as BCG in Tel Aviv. We have an office, several offices in the broader Middle East, in Dubai, in Riyadh, in Egypt. There's Jewish people at BCG. There is people of Palestine origin at BCG. There is people of many different religions at BCG, right? And I think we owe all of them respect. And I think, and as I'm sure many know, it's a very complicated conflict, right? It's a very complicated conflict. And of course, it's always easy to say, oh my God, it's so terrible on this side. Oh my God, it's so terrible on the other side. The reality is also, I think we all need to learn that sometimes we don't know as much about some of these things, right? They go back a long time in history, right? And they're very complicated in nature, right? And there is also often, so it is, and I think it's tempting to say, oh, I'm on this side, I'm on that side, I'm on that. At the end of the day, I mean, it's a little bit also, who am I to say? Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, what is my role in this, right? And my role in this, of course, is I make clients in that part of the world better. I make sure that I have, obviously I obey to all the laws. I make sure that the people are safe, that people are treated respectful, right? That people treat each other respectful. I'm sure there is different political views about that particular conflict, and also about others within BCG. I'm sure there are, right? But it's also a little bit, who am I to say, right? And there is also a bit of a respect versus the individual in that sense, that we do respect different points of view as long as people sort of abide to their standards. And I feel we are being tested in that dimension. We are.
There's no question.
But I just wanted to illustrate it on that example. And of course, it's very different facets and so on, true with the current administration in the United States, right? And with, frankly, also with other administrations in the world, in India, in Europe. And I mean, it's not true for just one particular country.
I appreciate that you leaned into the question, even as you feel like it is not your place to take a strong position, that you dare to say, okay, this is what I'm struggling with. This is the difficulty that I have to really be able to do that. And I really appreciate that you say, at the end of the day, the most important thing that I can do as a leader responsible for people is to show respect for the individuals that I am in touch with. And that's, I think, my takeaway from that last question, which I appreciate. Now we have sadly reached the end of our conversation. I want to thank you, of course, for extremely insightful conversation, for showing us how you lead, but also showing us how you deal with challenges. And I want to thank every one of you for having joined us. I know it's late. I know it's time for a drink. Thank you all for joining us, for learning from leaders, and see you next week. Peter, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. And I think it's now time to go. Look, I'm going to just look at you, make sure we get your blessing. Can we now go and drink, or do we have a final? This is it. Over to the drinks. Thank you.